Hello and welcome to Views and Reviews. In this episode, we are talking about ACL injuries. Joining me today is Crystal Palace forward Ashlee Hincks. How are you, Ashlee? Okay.
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you.
Good.
So, unfortunately for you, you've got an injury at the moment as well. What happened?
I broke a bone in my foot about 10 days ago playing Tottenham in a friendly, which is just really annoying. It's just one of those you can't predict that to happen. So unfortunately, I'm in a boot at the moment. Looks like I'm probably going to miss the rest of the season, which is really frustrating. But I'm just going to aim for next year now, to be quite honest with you.
Brilliant. Well, I hope the recovery goes well for you.
Yeah.
So this episode, as I said, is on ACL injuries. I'd like to start with how you got your injury first.
We were playing Lewis away, and in the first 10 minutes, I think it was, I'd run out to the wing, went to put a ball in the box, and as I crossed the ball, my left leg sort of remained planted, and obviously the motion the motion of me moving across, my knee just planted and twisted. But obviously I'd done my ACL, my MCL. I also completely tore my meniscus. So I've done pretty much everything other than the PCL. So yeah.
Did it hurt?
It really hurt. I know I've spoken to a lot of people about this. I think everyone goes through such a unique experience. I think if you just do just your ACL, I know a lot of people that can get up and walk, and they walk off the side of the pitch and aren't in too much pain. Me personally, it was excruciating. I think where I'd done my meniscus as well, my knee had locked, in sort of that angle, and I couldn't literally go either way. It was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. I had some gas and air and stuff. It wasn't great at all. I weirdly was in more pain from the injury than sort of after the surgery.
Oh, really?
Ironic, yeah, for me personally, yeah.
What was going through your mind when you were told how bad the injury was, and do you remember it?
I think I'm not really one to sort of stay down either. I'm pretty sort of robust, I would say. And instantly, in my head, I knew I'd done something serious. And obviously, the first thing that comes to mind with your knee is your ACL. I've had little knee problems before, and I've sort of strained my ACL or my other knee before, but it was nothing in comparison to what I felt. So I think instantly you know that you've done something quite serious. The next day I got in to see Palace's men's doctor. He drained my knee, and he drained a lot of blood, which is basically one of the biggest triggers that you've done your ACL. I went for an MRI scan that day, and I got my results the next day. It was sort of what we expected, but weirdly the meniscus didn't show up on any of the MRIs. I had a couple. I went to see a specialist, and no one sort of seen the meniscus until the surgeon got inside my knee, and it was completely torn.
Blimey. Why didn't it show up? Because it's...
I don't know. No one knows. I mean, myself and the physio was sort of adamant something must have done with the meniscus as well, just purely because it was locked. It was like that for 8 weeks. It was in a quite a bad way. So we were just shocked. I was thinking there must be something wrong with the meniscus, surely. But obviously, all the specialists are saying no. So you just think, okay, this must just be like a side effect of the ACL. But when I finally had my surgery 6 months later, when I come around, he also said there was a huge tear in the meniscus, and he just managed to save it. So it's weird that it didn't show up actually.
It's good that you got it when you did, though, because obviously you just said that you just about saved it. Otherwise, your career probably would have been over, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think you can play without the meniscus, but it basically causes a lot of sort of issues for later on in life. Like there's a girl on our team who hasn't got any meniscus, but it can sort of cause quite severe arthritis and stuff in your later years. So it's something you definitely want to try and keep if you can savour it in some way. So yeah.
And obviously you said you're out for you had your surgery 6 months later. How was that for you? The effects of it physically and mentally, knowing that you're out for the rest of the season and probably longer as well?
That's the difficult thing to come to terms with. I think obviously everyone knows the recovery periods after the surgery itself, but the having to wait 6 months for surgery was one of the hardest parts for me, because I already knew it was going to be at a minimum 9 months after surgery. And realistically, you don't really come back at 9 months. It's more 12 months. So in my head, like every month is ticking over, waiting for the operation. I'm already thinking, well, that's a year from that point. That was sort of the hardest thing for me, was trying to get the surgery because of the periods of recovery afterwards.
Why do you think it took so long for you to get your surgery?
It was on the NHS. Unfortunately, just on the waiting list with everyone else, but I was quite lucky in the sense that the consultant that I was with in the NHS, he did sort of put me on the urgent ones. I mean, otherwise I could have potentially been waiting 9 to 12 months. So I mean, I was sort of lucky I got in when I did, because like you said, the longer you leave it, I mean, it's weird, you just become, they told me I'd become like a high level coper. So he done the draw, like the test that you do is the draw test, and you can sort of instantly know if someone's ACL has gone or not. And even after I'd done it, everyone was pulling my knee and they could have sworn that like I'd not done my ACL, because you just sort of learn to cope without it. But yeah, I mean, I'm thankful that I got the surgeon was amazing. He was like a really good surgeon. So he also basically he's built another ACL on my knee. So I've had my original one repaired, but he's also effectively built me another one. So the chances of me redoing it are like 1%, rather than, I mean, otherwise it's 10 to 15% per season, even after you've had the surgery, that you stand a chance of redoing it.
So it's actually better than it was before then?
I would say so, yeah. I would honestly say my left knee is better than my right knee, to be quite honest with you.
That's surprising when you think it was completely broken and now it's just like a new knee and it's totally changed again. So
yeah, it's totally changed. He also found like an older injury in there, completely like cleaned my knee out. And I've honestly got like a brand new knee. Like I wish he could have done both of them at the same time and made me a new woman. So yeah, that
was not unfortunate. He got the injury, but he found another injury that you had already. You probably didn't know about, like you said.
Exactly.
You they didn't even know the MSL was it that was broken inside before. So
the MCL had gone, but the meniscus obviously had torn as well during the same time.
Did it frustrate you that you had to wait so long? Obviously, like you comparing it to the men's game, they obviously get it straight away, and there's other players like yourself and Renee Hector, for example, at Watford. Obviously, she's also not in the top league, so they can't join the Football Association, and they don't have enough money to pay for it. Did you get any support or funding for your surgery?
No, it was completely on the NHS. The surgery was going to cost about £11,000 or £12,000. I actually looked into paying it myself because of just, again, I didn't want to have to wait 6 months for the operation. But to be honest with you, I don't have that sort of money, so it wasn't really doable for me. Unfortunately, women's football is still where it's at in regards to below the Super League. Even if you're affiliated with a Premier League club, you don't have the sort of medical backup as what sort of the men do. Unfortunately, I think it's something that definitely, I know that it's gradually improving. Like this year, I think we've got like the FA, you have to put in a certain amount of money in the FA, double that for you. So for example, if someone was to now do their ACL in my team, there would be enough money in there for them to go and get private surgery, but there's still only like £30,000. We're not talking, I mean, 3 players go and do it, God forbid, but then that money's already gone. So if the 4th player then goes and does it, you've still not got enough money there. And we're talking about sort of a life-changing injury as well, not just sort of footballing one. So I definitely think it's something that needs to continue to be looked into it and put more money into, because people shouldn't be in the situation where you get injured basically sort of working for your employer and you're not really getting the medical stuff, the other side of it.
Well, you mentioned there that lots of other players, including yourself, in the women games have also had ACL injuries. You are one of 12 players from the top 2 tiers in women's football in England who have had season-ending ACL injuries in 2019-20 season. Is there a wider concern? Or do you think more research is needed?
Yeah, I do. I think the stats are becoming higher with the incorporation of going more sort of more full time. The training sessions have increased. Obviously, the intensity is increased. The football itself is increased, and I think that loading and stuff is having an effect. I think again, you've got to look at I'm semi-professional, so I'm still working full time. So in terms of your recovery and everything like that, it isn't the same as what it is in the top league in your full time. That is your job. You go and do your gym sessions, your strength work, your stretching, your nutrition, everything you need to get is there for you. But in the leagues lower, we don't have that. We're driving 4 hours a night on top of a 2.5 hour training session. I mean, you're then getting up at 6 o'clock again. You're going to work. Like I said, you're eating, your recovery. It's not going to be the same. So again, it's something that has to be taken into consideration with the loading that's now been expected, especially in the still semi-professional sort of environment.
What do you think can be done then?
Obviously, research needs to be done. I think, unfortunately, for females, it is generally just the way we're designed. Obviously, we're aware if our glutes are strong, our hamstrings are strong, our quads are strong, you're going to reduce the risk of you doing it. So it's probably something that especially women should be looking to incorporate in their game from an early age. I mean, I'm talking like early teens, getting your body ready at that age. Because I think if you are stronger in those areas, you're not putting as much pressure on your knees as what we probably have been. And I mean, I know personally for years, I've not really done any strength work. I mean, so I'm very surprised I haven't done it prior to me turning 30. So I think there's definitely some research, but like I said, I think the girls now coming through in the younger age groups, the S&C side of things is taken very seriously, because we know the repercussions if it isn't taken seriously. But definitely more research needs to be done, especially around sort of menstrual cycles and things like that. Because it's been proven that it also has an effect on obviously the body and stuff like that.
So talking about that, did it frustrate you that you didn't have this research when you were a younger player, for example? Because obviously you might have you said about the young players coming through, they might have more access to it now.
Yeah, I think it wasn't something that it was really pushed on when I was coming through, like the sports science side of things. I mean, it wasn't, you just trained on a Tuesday and Thursday and then you played on a Sunday. That was it. You might go for the odd run or do your own session, but it was never sort of set aside, look, you do 2-3 strength sessions a week. This is specifically what you need to do. Obviously tailored to individual. Some individuals need work on completely different areas to what another individual might need. So I mean, had I had that information when I was sort of 14, 15, I absolutely would have incorporated it into sort of my everyday training life from a younger age, definitely.
And you mentioned menstrual cycles as well. I know Lucy Bronze was on about it in a Let's Play Together podcast you did. And I spoke to Reece Land about it, who's the director of Next Gen Solutions. And he said about, obviously, the menstrual cycle, you can't do anything about it, but of course it's going to have an impact on you. But what can you do about it, do you think?
I think, unfortunately, this is, again, is something that, because I don't think there's too much research been done into it. It's sort of a flippant remark. Like if you are on your menstrual cycle, it absolutely has a huge effect on your body, your mental state, but yet you're expected to give just as much as the week before when you weren't. And there's definitely, it's like it's sort of taboo to speak about it, or to be naive to think it doesn't have an effect on that particular training session. So I do think it needs to be incorporated into training loading for people. I know, like the USA women's team do it. They have completely tailored training around the individual's menstrual cycles, and obviously they're just going to win the World Cup, to put that into perspective. So it obviously does have an effect on when you're going to maximise their strength, when you're going to maximise their endurance, the right times to give them a day off, and a really low loading for that day. So I do think it needs to be taken more seriously. And again, another thing that probably needs a lot more research.
Thank you so much for your time today. You're absolutely brilliant. I hope glad the ACL injury's okay now. You got a better knee, and I hope the other injury is okay. You'll be back soon. So thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome. Have a nice day.
I'm now joined by Professor of Paediatric Sport and Exercise, Mark de Sainte Croix. How are you, Mark? You okay?
Yeah, fine. Thanks, Conal. Thanks for having me on today.
No worries. The pronunciation all right there?
Yes, yeah. Think French.
Good. So obviously this episode is on ACL injuries in women's football. We know that there's a higher risk in women's football, but why is this?
Yeah, you're right. The risk is significantly greater in women. Up to the literature might tell you 8 times greater risk for ACL injuries compared to males. So we classify females as a high risk or at risk group. The factors or the reasons behind this increased risk are multifactorial and quite complex, which makes sort of understanding the risk factors quite difficult and problematic in some ways, because there are so many of them. What we try and do is split them up into what we refer to as modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. So non-modifiable risk factor might be something like wider hips in females that causes greater what we call Q angle, which puts greater load on the knee. There might be a difference in the anatomy of the knee joint itself, but these are all factors that we can't change. They're non-modifiable. There's nothing we can do about them. So really, as practitioners, we're all more interested in those that are modifiable, so things that we might be able to change through training or through some form of intervention. So an idea of a modifiable risk factor, if you think about the knee as a joint that needs to stay stable during dynamic activities that induce lots of load through the joint. So when I jump and land, when I sprint, when I change direction, I'm putting a big stress and load through the joint. The muscles that surround that joint are there to help keep that joint stable. So it's really important that the muscles work really well and effectively around those joints. So we think about those. The other things that crop up all the time, one of the buzz ones often in the literature is around joint laxity in females, and that being potentially linked to menstrual cycle and hormones. It's quite a controversial one because there's very limited research evidence to show that link. It does pop up quite a lot in the common media that my menstrual cycle is to blame for my ACL injury. But if you look at the research evidence, there isn't really a strong evidence base for that yet. We're still investigating to see those links sort of at the moment. So you can imagine if for example, women's hips get wider, and if hormones do play a role, then it becomes even more important that we make sure that the modifiable risk factors, that the muscles around the joint work effectively and efficiently, that women are using good biomechanics when they land, that the joints are in good positions and things like that. So a rather long answer to your question, but I suppose the key take-home message there is that the risk factors are multifactorial and complex. We're not going to say there's one or two things. There are many things, and we haven't talked about other factors such as whether you're playing on a 3G or a grass pitch, which may influence the risk. So these are sort of, again, non-modifiable factors, but they're external. Have we got the right kit on? There's loads of stuff about, women having the right boots, etc., to reduce or limit the risk. So it's a really complex area that's difficult to work in.
So obviously your work is paediatric. So is there a concern that if it's the ACL injuries are done earlier in the youth, it's easier to diagnose?
We know that some of the things we've just talked about there, the start of the menstrual cycle, the widening of the hips, these all occur during puberty. So obviously, if you've got a female footballer who's going through a rapid period of growth, hips are getting wider, she's probably putting on a little bit more fat mass as a percentage of her whole body mass. So she's getting heavier, but it's predominantly fat rather than muscle usually that's going on because of the less circulating testosterone and things like that. You can see that you've got a high risk athlete as they progress through that period of growth and maturation. So these girls are very, very high risk. What we're also saying is that if we're going to make sure that the modifiable risk factors are effective, we need to establish those things early on. So, if we can establish good movements, for example, good movement competency, let's say in younger kids, that will track through into adulthood. We've probably all done it. Trying to change an adult's behavior is an absolute nightmare. Because the behavior is ingrained and it's an established behavior. It's difficult to change behavior. It's much easier to establish behavior. So what we try and do by working with kids is say, we need to get in there really early, right down the pyramid, with grassroots girls playing even for fun. Can we make sure that they're moving well when they're playing, so that as they progress, let's say through a talent pathway, we're reducing the risk or the likelihood of injury because they're moving better. We've managed to establish better strength around the joint, all of those factors that might help mitigate the risk.
So is that why it's so tricky to diagnose the cause? Because obviously it depends on when a person gets an injury and whether they're on their menstrual cycles, and obviously when it occurs for different females at different times.
Yeah, so the difficulty is, as I sort of identified, there's so many different risk factors. If we want to try and unpick which risk factor contributes to the incidence, you need to almost have tested all of those factors. So I need to test maybe, how good the person moves in terms of the range of movement of the joint, how strong the muscle is, what their landing mechanics is like, where they are in their menstrual cycle, if they're a child, where they are in relation to their growth spurt. There's so many factors that I need to measure, but I need to measure those also closely to when the ACL injury occurs. And of course, I don't know when it's going to occur. So it's really difficult. I mean, predicting is incredibly difficult. If you think about it, we as a public fund the Met Office millions and millions of pounds a year to predict the weather. Do they get it right? No. I'm sure you've been caught outside when it's supposed to be sunny and it's rained on you. So predicting is incredibly hard, especially when there's so many factors potentially in play. And the key thing about predicting being difficult is if it's difficult to predict it, it's quite difficult to say, well, this is what we need to do as an intervention to try and prevent it or reduce the risk, because any sort of training or prevention program needs to be related to the risk. If we know what the risks are, then we try and train to mitigate those risks. But identifying those risks in the first place are incredibly difficult. In saying that, there are some really good studies, and a lot of the studies showing that, some form of intervention, some form of training, whether that's landing mechanics, whether it's sort of plyometric work, whether it's strengthening the muscles, they're all quite effective at reducing risk.
Yeah, I was going to come on to that actually. What do you think can be done to prevent this? Obviously, don't want to get the injury in the first place, but when it does occur, do you think more training, like you just said, would be a good option?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to prevent the first injury, because we also know that injury is a risk factor for re-injury, in fact, quite a high risk factor. So I'm sure anyone playing sport has been injured, and unfortunately if you get injured you're more prone to re-injury, particularly also with ACLs, and sometimes not even the same ACL. You can then get on the other side, and there are good examples of a lot of the female players who have recovered. I suppose we should be mindful that you can recover from this serious injury, but if you look at quite a lot of the England women's team, even the Lionesses, there are quite a few players that have had multiple ACL injuries and managed to recover from it. In terms of prevention, it's difficult to totally prevent. What we try and do is reduce or manage the risk. So if we reduce the risk, we potentially reduce the likelihood that an ACL injury is going to occur. But we're not going to stop all ACL injuries. Okay, but what we're trying to do is reduce the number that we start to see through good training. And there are a number of training programs available, some that have been designed by FIFA. That's called the FIFA 11 Plus. We developed one a few years ago with the FA that we've delivered in the talent pathway, that's been very effective and has been running for about 7 or 8 years now. That's sort of designed as a little bit of a replacement for what some coaches might have been doing as a traditional warm-up, which didn't really do anything, a little bit. I'm setting up my session as a coach, go and have a little run around the pitch, around the goalposts, do a few stretches, and you're ready. The program is a little bit more geared towards strengthening muscles around the knee, making sure there's good landing techniques, some of those things that we know probably reduce the load around the knee, because the only thing that makes the ACL tear is if there's too much load going through the joint. So, as I said, we need to make that joint as stable as possible when these women are landing from jumps, when they're cutting or turning or sidestepping, whatever, when they're doing those movements where there's lots of load. And as I say, these programs are really effective. Up to 80 to 90% reduction in injuries if you use these programs. The problem is that there was a massive program done out in the States showing this 80% reduction in injuries over a season. But when they followed up 2 years later, only half of the clubs were still using the prevention program. So there's a bit of a problem with people continuing to use them, even though, I can show you, look, I'm going to reduce your injury rates by 80%. If you were a coach, I'd hope to snap my hand off and go, brilliant. But then it's no good if 2 years later you're not using it, because if you don't use it, it's obviously there isn't anything there to be effective. So these programs really do work if they're well adopted and implemented and maintained.
Why do you think they're not using it? Is it due to a lack of funding, or they just think that, obviously, like you said, once they've done it once, they think it's okay and it won't happen again, but it probably will?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, because I don't think anyone's really done any follow-up stuff. My hunch is that either new coaches have come in and the knowledge just hasn't been passed on. We find quite a lot of coach turnover in football, so often it's really important that it's embedded as a philosophy within a club, that everyone's doing it, so that if one coach leaves, the whole program doesn't just leave with the coach. So whenever we've worked with teams before, it's about embedding it across a club is important. So that might be one of the reasons. I think the other reason is one of the programs, or the program that was being used, was a bit boring after a while, quite repetitive. Maybe that's produced a lack of buy-in. So it's all about thinking creatively how to do the same sort of stuff, but maybe incorporate it into actual football drills and things, rather than it being a warm-up at the start of a session. Are there other ways to keep the girls engaged, interested in it? And also, it's that total buy-in from just the coaches and the players. If they perceive it to be important as part of being a female footballer, or it doesn't need to be football, whatever it is, if you're doing a dynamic sport, hockey, rugby, netball, badminton, tennis, wherever, you're going to jump, land and change direction, that, buy-in's crucial. And often buy-in is more successful if it's fun. You know that yourself. I'm sure you've done training and you've got quite bored with it. Someone comes in and mixes it up and you get enthused and re-engaged in it. So quite a big thing is around coach education as well, how we educate the coaches to make sure that they continue to keep the prevention training fun, because it can get quite boring.
It's been absolutely fantastic today. Thank you so much for your time. That was really, really good.
That's okay, pleasure. And any female athletes listening, get onto a prevention program and try and reduce your injury risk.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.